3 games into the season, and the Sacramento Kings already have a losing record. Is it time to fire Luke Walton yet? On a serious note, I've gotten multiple questions after the Kings' recent loss to the Golden State Warriors about Luke Walton being on the hot seat, how long his leash is, whether or not his job is already in jeopardy. We're going to touch on that. Plus, I've seen some pretty crazy De'Aaron Fox overreactions. I know there's frustration based off of the slow start that Fox has gotten off to this season, but just because he's had a slow start, that doesn't erase all of the progress and him solidifying himself as the star and leader for this Kings team last season. We'll touch on that, but Fox absolutely does have to be better. Plus, the Kings and Phoenix Suns, I'll tell you from a source in Phoenix what the Kings have to do to get a victory and get back to 500. It's all on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through to December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been a Sacramento sports media member, Sacramento Kings media member for the last 7 years. This is my 8th season covering Kings basketball, formerly with Sports 1140 KHTK Radio in Sacktown, now with ABC 10 Television. And I actually have to start out today's podcast with some massive thank yous. The Locked On Kings channel on YouTube has reached 1,000 subscribers. It's a very important milestone, not just for YouTube and the future of this channel. It's just a great milestone for myself as someone who, quite honestly, was a little nervous about making the transition to YouTube or starting on YouTube. The audio listenership just of this podcast has grown exponentially year over year over year, and that continued through the entire pandemic, which I am so incredibly thankful for. And I was worried about splitting that audience a little bit, or about maybe the quality going down on one with taking on another, but that really hasn't been the case. Been working hard here to bring you great content on both YouTube and wherever you get your audio versions of podcasts, and you guys have continued to respond. The support on the YouTube channel is great. The numbers have continued to just go up for audio listeners. You guys are so incredible. It's the loyalty and the love that I expect from this Kings fan base that enjoys or that deserves to enjoy their basketball team more than they do, tries to make the best out of every single situation, and absolutely 100% deserves to have a winning team and, more importantly, playoffs and a championship here in Sacramento. So thank you for your incredible support. I really appreciate that. Now, enough of the mushy stuff. Let's jump into why some of you are wrong, why some of you need to calm down when it comes to Luke Walton and De'Aaron Fox. That's actually not really my take. Some overreactions to De'Aaron Fox were a little extreme, whether it's by the YouTube audience or people on social media. It's just like, I get the frustrations with how Foxes play. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but I actually now it doesn't surprise me that Luke Walton gets blamed for anything that really goes wrong with the Sacramento Kings. That's been a consistent trend really over his time here in Sacramento. And that's been a consistent issue really since Rick Adelman was fired, right? With the amount of head coaches that have come through Sacramento. I think Luke is number 10 since Adelman was fired in 2006 or at the end of that season. So we're used to the coach being part of the problem. And I'm not saying that Luke Walton is not a part of the problem, but I'm actually far more team Luke Walton at this point in time than maybe I was at this point last season, or really at any point of Luke's tenure here in Sacramento. But I actually got genuine questions from people, because I've talked about this before. Like, if the Kings don't make the playoffs, I don't think the play-in is good enough. If the Kings don't make the playoffs, I think Luke Walton loses his job, especially with him going into the final year of his contract. And we know a 1-year contract, or being the final year of your contract as a head coach, it's a lame duck year. It's a position that most coaches hate being in. and they expect if they don't get a contract before or around that lame duck year, that they are not going to be around for much longer. And that could very well be the case for Luke Walton if this team is not successful. Now, there's also a good chance that if this Kings team is really, really bad, Luke Walton doesn't even make it halfway through the season. And I'm going to tell you what I think the number is for like record or how many games below 500 the Kings need to get to for that to start to become a reality for Luke Walton. We're going to dive into that. But I've talked about how the leash for Walton isn't as long as maybe it should be, isn't as long as it's been in the past, but it's also not incredibly short either. So a couple of you on social media and on YouTube reached out and said, like, at what point is Luke Walton under fire a little bit? Because he's never going to be blameless, but at what point does this Kings team get to the line where he has to be let go or the Kings have to make a change and you're going to start at the head coach position more often than not? I'll dive into that a little bit because right now at this point, even if you're disappointed with the 1 and 2 start, it's way too early. Way too early. I think no matter what, Luke Walton deserves 20 games this season. Even if the Kings, the one win that they've gotten, even if they go 1-19, which is extreme, it's not going to happen. I think Luke Walton deserves 20 games in Sacramento before any kind of rash decision is made. Maybe 1-19 is a little extreme. That actually, come to think of it, if the Kings go on a 19-game losing streak, hell, if the Kings go on a 9-game losing streak again, Luke Walton might be in trouble. I'm going to add that to the list. If the Kings go on a 9-game losing streak at any point this season, I think Luke Walton deserves to be fired almost on the spot. If the Kings go on a 5 or more game losing streak at any point this season, that's when the seat starts to get a little hot for me. So there's a big difference between the seat getting hot and bring the axe down, right? Very big difference between those two. If based off the fact that the Kings went on 2 separate 9-game losing streaks last season, if it happens at any point again this year, that might be the axe for Luke. Plus, if this Kings team has a 9-game losing streak and falls into a hole because of that losing streak, I don't know if they're ever going to be able to climb out of it with how talented and how competitive the Western Conference is, not just for playoff spots, but now for play-in spots. There's only 2, technically 4, but I only count the 9th and 10th seed as the 2 play-in spots. There's only 2 available, and there's arguably 5 or 6 teams that are fighting for it. The Kings, of course, being one of them. So first off, let's look at what Luke has done well, because Luke has done some things well, and it starts actually with defense. The defense is not exponentially better by any means, not even close, but the defense is average enough. It is okay enough. It is somewhat reliable enough for the Kings to be putting themselves in positions to win games. And that Luke Walton and his coaching staff deserve credit for that, as of course do the players. They're buying in. Of course, the addition of like Davion Mitchell has significantly helped this team. Eye test and numbers say that the Kings defense is better. It's not exponentially better. I think the eye tests makes the Kings look better defensively than what they actually are. And truth be told, if you look at the defensive numbers, I think the Kings are in like the low 20s. So they're around like 21, 22, 23 in defensive rating so far this season. I should get that number to actually confirm it. But they're right around that range. You have better fourth quarters and take away some of the defensive lapses that the Kings have had in fourth quarters, they might be right at their goal, which is around that 15 mark, right in the middle of the pack, which, like I've said, coming into this season, like to me, that's the peak for this team. That's all I can really ask for. This Kings team defensively has been fine enough. They don't have to be good. We knew that this Kings team was rarely going to win a game on the backs of their defense. The hope coming into this season was defensively, the Kings are just okay enough to put themselves in a position for their offense to win a game when it comes down to it, when it comes to crunch time. And in all 3 of these games, defensively, the Kings have put themselves in a position to win. The problem is in 2 out of the 3 of them, offensively, and especially when it comes to big names like De'Aaron Fox, that's where they've dropped the ball. I don't know how much of that I can put on Luke Walton. In fact, I don't think more than like 10% of the blame goes on Luke Walton for the Kings putting themselves in the positions that they want to be in and Fox not stepping up to the plate. Like, how much do I blame Luke Walton for the Kings going 17 or being outscored 17-13 in the first 6 or so minutes of the fourth quarter when Steph and Dre were on the bench? He's absolutely not blameless. He's the coach. If he recognized 3 minutes in that lineup wasn't working. Maybe he should have made some changes. And rotations are another somewhat weak point of Luke Walton that we can discuss. But Luke put 3 out of his 5 starters in to start the fourth quarter with the 2 best players on the Golden State Warriors on the bench. And this Kings team still didn't close the gap. In fact, the gap got bigger. How much do I put that on Luke Walton? I put that all on the players. I put that on De'Aaron Fox not being able to execute. I put that on the team not being better than the guys who they are better than on paper and on the floor. Like, there's no way anybody can make the argument that bench lineup that the Golden State Warriors had in is better than a Kings lineup featuring 3 starters that also includes De'Aaron Fox. Like, there's no way you can make that argument, and I'm not going to listen to that. And I don't put that on Luke Walton. Again, maybe his adjustment could have been putting all 5 starters in, or only playing the best players that particular game, which is like Davion Mitchell and Harrison Barnes and De'Aaron Fox, even though he struggled. I mean, he needs to be on the floor there. Tyrese Halliburton, I guess, needs to be on the floor there. I could blame Luke, I guess, a little bit for Buddy Hield having a rough night offensively and giving him so many opportunities and so many minutes in the fourth quarter. Like, okay, these are rotation conversations where I can put a little more on Luke there. But defensively as a whole, I think Luke has done well. I think the Kings have done well, and that's a credit to him. I also give him credit for how much faith he's put in young players, especially Davion Mitchell. Now, Davion has earned that. Don't get me wrong. Dave Yeager, former Kings head coach Dave Yeager, had a kind of archaic, older, old-fashioned mindset, which is I don't really give rookies that much playing time and starting spots right away. And most coaches follow that philosophy loosely. Like, Luke is one of those guys who follows that philosophy loosely. He's not going to just thrust a young player into the starting lineup. We saw that last season with Tyrese Halliburton, right? Even if you and I were screaming for Tyrese to be put into the game and to start alongside De'Aaron Fox, Luke was hesitant with that. He rode with Buddy Hield for the majority of the season. Now, in the end, the Kings missed the playoffs. They weren't good. It didn't necessarily work, so we can criticize him for that. But in this case, Davion Mitchell has gotten a lot of opportunity, a lot of minutes from the get-go. And Luke has said it himself, when Fox and Halliburton aren't in the game at the same time, the primary ball handling responsibilities and facilitator responsibilities fall on the back of Davion Mitchell. And Luke has said that he, his coaching staff, and the players, they all trust Davion in that spot already. Now, I think there's 2 things there. One, Davion's come into the NBA after spending extra time in college. So he's older, he's smarter, he's bigger, he's more ready for the NBA, at least physically and mentally. So that's one area. But 2, Luke Walton is showing confidence in a player that, one, he already knows he can rely on, because Davion Mitchell is one of the most reliable. In fact, Davion Mitchell has been easily the most reliable guard on this Kings lineup so far this season. It's not particularly close to me. But he knows Davion can succeed, and he's giving him the opportunity to do so, putting him in tough situations, guarding guys like Steph Curry. I mean, the amount of talent that Davion has had to face to start his career, the amount of in the Western Conference, you're basically going to take on an all-star level guard on a nightly basis, unless even OKC has like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So that example doesn't necessarily work. Like, in the West, you're going to face top quality guards nightly. And Davion has gotten those assignments from Luke Walton. I give him credit for that. I do give him a lot of credit for that. Now, like I said, the rotations need to be better. And the half-court offense has just been terrible. Absolutely terrible. And it's been so bad that I can't just put it on the Kings players who need to execute better. With the focus that Walton and the Kings have put on the defensive end during training camp, during the offseason, heading into this season, like, I understand how much they're working on improving defensively, and we're seeing it bear some fruit as of right now, and it absolutely was necessary. This Kings team had to get better defensively, right? Of course they did. But we also have to hold Luke accountable for the things that he said, just like we hold the players accountable for the things that they've said. And both Luke and the players have said the same thing, which is that they're not worried about this team offensively. Offensively, they know that they can score. They're going to be fine. It's all about defense. If they had the defense, they would win basketball games. Well, the defense is there, or at least good enough for them to win games right now, but they're losing because the offense isn't good enough. And we see the Kings get forced into half-court offensive sets, especially in the fourth quarter when teams do a better job taking care of the basketball and it becomes winning time and you take that step up. And the Kings don't necessarily know what to do. If you watch their play in the half court, it's a lot of just kind of the same thing over and over again. High pick and roll for either De'Aaron Fox or Davion Mitchell, and that either results in a open three as the defense collapses, a potentially mid-range jumper or three-point jumper on a pick and pop scenario, or it goes nowhere and the Kings recycle and do it again, get late in the shot clock, and then have to chuck up a bad shot. Like that's the extent of their half-court offense, at least according to my mind. I haven't really seen them run too many good plays unless it's coming out of a timeout. Like out of a timeout, the Kings are really, really good at executing plays in the half court out of the timeout. But in the flow of the game, in the fourth quarter during winning time, when the Kings are forced into half court offensive sets, they've looked absolutely terrible. So yeah, you're damn right I put that on Luke Walton. That absolutely needs to get better. So to answer the question, at what point does his seat get hot? I already told you, like a 9-game losing streak, that's the axe. That's not seat hot, that's the axe. 5-game losing streak to me, that's where the seat gets hot. I think we need to really re-examine this when we get to 25 games into the season. If the Kings are 10 games under 500 at any point this year, or if they have less than 10 wins at the 25-game mark this season, that's where I think Luke is teetering right on the edge of getting fired. Now, that's a 10-15 record winning, or let's say that's a 9-16 record for Luke Walton to be in trouble at 25 games. That's not insurmountable. It's only 6 more losses than you have wins. But in the Western Conference, that record puts you, in my opinion, well out of the play-in picture, at least this year. And if that's truly the goal, which we've talked about, it is the goal. The Kings making the postseason, it's postseason or bust. If that's the goal, you have to hold everything to that measuring stick. But you committed to Luke Walton for another year, meaning you have to at least ride it out for close to a third of the season and see what you have. You're running the risk of, if it's really, really bad, you put yourself in a hole that you can't climb out of anymore. But at that point, you've moved on from your head coach and you're hitting the reset button again anyway. Unless you pull a Atlanta Hawks and all of a sudden a new coach comes in and that team completely turns it around and makes a run all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. Did they get to the Eastern Conference Finals? God, it feels like so long ago. I can't remember. But Atlanta went on a fantastic run last season after they changed coaches. That is very rare. Very rare. And I'll say this. Like, with the amount of coaching changes that the Kings have gone through, I'm not using it as an excuse to keep a bad coach if Luke Walton is indeed a bad coach, which I don't think he is. I don't think he's great, but I don't think he's bad. But the Kings going through another coaching change, tell me why it's going to be different. Why would it be different? We've seen it 9 times. Why would it be different? I don't know. I'm more pro Luke Walton as of right now. I'm willing to give him a longer leash than maybe some people are, but that's where I think Luke Walton's seat starts to get hot. Let me know if you agree. You can reach me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. If you're watching on YouTube, leave your comment section or your comments down in the section below. Let me know, like, if there's a record or a losing streak or something where you go, if I'm Monty McNair and the Kings get to this point, I'm firing Luke Walton right there on the spot or the next day when they come in for practice. If there's that benchmark for you or that number for you, let me know what it is. I want to hear it and we can discuss that. We're also going to discuss some of these overreactions to De'Aaron Fox and his slow start of the season. Plus, I have to let you know what I think and what an expert from Phoenix thinks the Kings have to do to defeat the Suns. Before that, though, I want to let you know that today's Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by DirecTV Stream. Let me know if this sounds familiar. You've got one device that lets you catch the game live. You have another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone. And you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for all the other good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment that you love without the hassle and finally get TV all together in one place. It's called DirecTV Stream. Now, don't stop listening just because you hear DirecTV, because I got a really, really good perk for you here. But DirecTV Stream brings all your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before. Watch your favorite sports, movies, TV shows, all in one place. No more juggling remotes. And here's the best part: no annual contract. Yeah, the worst part about TV, the whole reason to cut a cord in the first place, DirecTV's done that for you with DirecTV Stream. It's a subscription-based system you can cancel at any time. Get rid of the clutter and the confusion. Get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible devices required. Content varies by package. I have absolutely no problem saying that if De'Aaron Fox had played at his averages last season in all 3 of these games, the Kings would be 3-0. I have no problem saying that. The Kings, like we talked about in the last segment, did everything defensively. Maybe not everything. Did what they needed to do defensively to put themselves in a position to be 3-0. And the offense, and especially De'Aaron Fox's offense, has let them down. De'Aaron Fox is the difference between this team being 3-0 and 1-2. De'Aaron Fox is the difference between this team being a playoff team and another losing team. De'Aaron Fox is the difference between the Kings being relevant and irrelevant. And I'm not trying to undermine the importance of other players on this roster. Harrison Barnes, he's been fantastic so far this season. Fantastic. And I hope he can continue that. Tyrese Halliburton hasn't been the best this year so far, but we still believe he is arguably the second best player on this Kings team, or can turn into the second best player on this Kings team. He was fantastic last season. The Kings have high hopes for him going forward. Davion Mitchell, been excellent so far. Easily the Kings MVP defensively. Like I said, the most reliable guard so far. Just had a 22-point performance offensively against the Golden State Warriors, which we can't necessarily expect that on a nightly basis from him. He's been great. Alex Len, to some extent, very solid off the bench. All these guys are important. But if De'Aaron Fox is not De'Aaron Fox, everything that they do is basically irrelevant when it comes to winning and losing. These last 2 games are a perfect example of that. If anybody wants to get just a very vague idea of why the Kings win or lose a game, if you miss the game, before you dive into like all other numbers, open up the box score and immediately go to De'Aaron Fox's point totals. If it's less than 20, it's probably a loss. Hell, if it's less than 22, it's probably a loss. De'Aaron needs to score 23 plus points for the Kings to be a consistent winning team. And even that might not be enough. Like De'Aaron probably has to be a 25 to 27 plus points per game scorer. He scored 27 points in the opener in Portland. Most of those came in the first half. The second half, he was not very good, and the Kings almost lost that game. But you know what? Almost doesn't matter. They did win. They were 1-0 at that point, and De'Aaron Fox was averaging 27 points per game. Not a coincidence. The next 2 games combined, 29 points. 0-2. Not a coincidence. So yeah, De'Aaron Fox has to be significantly better. He is absolutely 100% dropped the ball. It's not fair to say that the loss is 100% on his shoulders, because there's no such thing as a loss being 100% on anybody's shoulders. But if anybody carries the most weight, it's De'Aaron. And truth be told, if anybody is going to take the most weight onto themselves, it's De'Aaron. I don't know De'Aaron Fox personally. I've had, other than basketball conversations with De'Aaron, I've talked to De'Aaron about video games and movies a couple times. Like, that's the extent of my understanding of who De'Aaron is as a person. I know who he is as a player. But over the last 5 years of covering De'Aaron and talking to De'Aaron and getting to know De'Aaron a little bit and understanding who De'Aaron is as a basketball player, there is nothing that I could say. There's nothing that you could say. There's nothing that any national host could say, any writer. There's nothing that a coach could say. There's nothing that a teammate could say that will affect De'Aaron Fox and hold him more accountable than what he says to himself. I don't need to be De'Aaron's best friend to know that. He holds himself to a high standard. It's what's gotten him this far. And to his credit, unlike some other people on this Kings team, he has surrounded himself with people who also hold him accountable. That's a big difference. De'Aaron absolutely knows he has to get better. And he's not just going to coast and twiddle his thumbs and go, oh, well, like, whatever. It's just another loss. Like, De'Aaron knows that this Kings team is 3-0 if he plays better. He knows that. Everybody knows that. The overreactions to this 1-2 start and De'Aaron struggles over the last couple of games, but really De'Aaron struggles over the course of the entire season because he's had far too many turnovers. He's averaging 5 turnovers a game so far this year. I think his scoring is 18.7 points. Not horrible, not nearly good enough. Not nearly good enough for how high the bar is for Fox and this Kings team in Sacramento. Like good isn't good enough anymore. Actually, fair isn't good enough. Good is a starting point. De'Aaron said it himself. On nights that he's not great, he has to be good. Well, he hasn't been good the last 2 games. If he was good, the Kings could have won those games. Probably would have won those games. If he's great, they absolutely do win those games. No doubt in my mind. But when he's fair, not good enough. The overreaction, though, has been way over the top. Way over the top. Now, I've gotten in trouble in the past, and I've tried to step away from telling fans how to fan or calling fans out for saying things that were dumb in a fit of passion or frustration. Like, I've tried to get away from that. And I'm not here to tell you that your feelings on De'Aaron Fox or on the Kings, your frustrations are wrong. Because, look, you've been a Kings fan, I'm sure, a very long time. You've sat through years upon years of struggling like I and everybody else has. You're entitled to your opinion, absolutely 100%. But I just want to make this perfectly clear. 3 bad games, really 2.5 bad games for De'Aaron Fox. That does not erase all of the progress that Fox made last season. De'Aaron Fox last season was phenomenal. De'Aaron Fox last season showed that he can be a star, an all-star, and the leader of a good basketball team. Because when De'Aaron was playing at his absolute best, the Kings were winning basketball games with a significantly less talented roster than they have right now, without playing a lick of defense, mind you. But at the same time, we celebrated De'Aaron Fox all offseason for the season he had last year, right? He still had 11 games last season where he scored less than 20 points. 11 games in a shortened season. My point in bringing that up is Fox is not going to be phenomenal every single night. It's impossible to expect that of him. He is going to have more games this season where he is less than good, where he is fair. And I'll tell you right now, the Kings are going to lose those games. They're going to lose those games. But all of this progress he made last season is not erased. I am not concerned at this point that De'Aaron Fox can't be the star and the leader the Kings fans expect and want him to be. 3 games is not going to erase that. It's going to take a whole hell of a... It's going to take half a season of him being this bad for me to start to believe that that's the case. That's what it's going to take. So I'm not concerned about that. I want to make sure that I hammer that point home. De'Aaron has had struggles in the past, and the Kings, yes, lose during those times. He knows what the bar is right now. He knows how much of... if the Kings are going to be successful, it mainly falls on his shoulders. He's aware of that. I expect him to get better as soon as tomorrow's game in Phoenix. I expect him to be better. And truth be told, as we get into next segment and talk about what the Kings have to do to beat the Phoenix Suns, they don't have to do a whole lot different than what they've been doing in these first 3 games. Do enough like you've been doing to put yourself in a position to win the game in the fourth quarter, and then De'Aaron, step up. That's where it's at. The overreaction saying trade De'Aaron Fox for Ben Simmons, or this is actually Davion Mitchell's team, or De'Aaron's too soft, he'll never be as good. And I've seen the comparisons between De'Aaron Fox and John Morant. Look, John Morant's playing out of his mind right now, and anybody who would pick John Morant over De'Aaron Fox, I understand completely at this point in time. John Morant has been insane, and the Memphis Grizzlies are winning because of it, because John Morant knows that he has to play at that level for this Grizzlies team to be good. And lo and behold, he's delivering. Good for him. Not taking that away from him at all. I understand if you want to compare John Morant to De'Aaron Fox right now and so go see that's what a leader is supposed to do and that's what De'Aaron Fox isn't doing. I get that. Give yourself a larger sample size is all I'm saying. Press the brakes on that a little bit. Ease it down. And don't be surprised when De'Aaron gets back to his normal form as early. I expect it in Phoenix. In fact, I'm calling it right now. De'Aaron Fox is scoring more than 25 points against the Phoenix Suns. Hopefully it's a win, but De'Aaron will score more than 25 points against Phoenix. I have full confidence in saying that. But in addition to that, what do the Kings have to do to beat the Phoenix Suns? We'll get into that coming up next. Right now, though, I want to let you know that you can bet on a Kings win over the Phoenix Suns. Maybe you want to use your pessimism to make some money. Maybe you want to bet on the Phoenix Suns to defeat the Sacramento Kings. Take their number, because absolutely, the Kings are the underdogs in this game. You can do that on betonline.ag, the number one place for all your sports gambling, all your casino games. They have it all right there for you. BetOnline remains the number one spot for basketball, football action this season. You can head to the new desktop or mobile website to sign up today. Receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. All you have to use is promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, all one word, to receive your bonus. From basketball to football, baseball, postseason, NHL, boxing, and the UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. And of course, our title sponsor, Locked On Kings, brought to you by our friends at Rock Auto. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible, really, for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. And even the parts that they do have stocked are only their brands at their set price points. You have no options. You have no ability to negotiate or maneuver. You're priced in. You're kind of stuck. Well, rockauto.com allows you to get out of that stuck feeling, allows you to save money while also getting the parts that you need. And it even helps educate you if you're a bonehead when it comes to cars, like I am. I've already used rockauto.com to get a couple of different car parts. It has saved me over $300 for 2 different car parts. Fantastic. You can spend 30, 50, or even 100% more at your local chain auto parts store if you want to, or you can save that money at rockauto.com. And in addition, save yourself some time. It's easy to negotiate. They're a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Like I said, they're also really easy to maneuver and figure out for someone like me who doesn't know anything about cars. They have everything you can need, from brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So are the Sacramento Kings favorites to beat the Phoenix Suns in Phoenix? No. Pretty simple. No, they're absolutely not the favorites to beat the Suns in Phoenix. And the Suns right now are looking for a win because I think they're 1-2 on the season. They've gotten off to a slow start as well. Some good teams have gotten off to slow starts, while some surprise teams like the Memphis Grizzlies and Chicago Bulls are off to red hot starts. So it just goes to show you, sometimes at the beginning of the season can be a little abnormal, although I do think both the Memphis Grizzlies and the Chicago Bulls are going to be better than advertised this year. I had more questions about the Grizzlies than I did the Bulls. The Bulls are my Eastern Conference team that I chose this year. Every year I choose an Eastern Conference team to follow and kind of root for. The Bulls were my team this year more than because I'm just kind of fascinated with that group. The addition of Lonzo Ball, Alex Caruso, DeMar DeRozan, of course, the trades that they made. I'm a really big fan of Zach LaVine. So I'm rooting for that Chicago Bulls team to be successful. But if the Kings were to play the Chicago Bulls, I'd feel the same way as I do against the Phoenix Suns coming up, which is the Kings are not favorites. That being said, the Kings are also not heavy underdogs. They've proven in these first 3 games that they can do enough to put themselves in a position to get a win. And more than likely, the best chance for the Kings getting a win in Phoenix is to steal one. Now, a complete theft doesn't have to be trailing the entire game and then snatching it at the very, very end, kind of like what the Utah Jazz did to the Sacramento Kings on their home opener last Friday. A theft can be just hanging around. A theft can be even leading for a while, but when it comes down to it in a close game, the Kings close out and get the job done. That's really all I'm asking for from this Kings team, is to do, for the most part, what they've done in these first 3 games defensively. Put yourself in a position in the fourth quarter to win this game in Phoenix. And then all eyes are on De'Aaron Fox. All eyes are on Tyrese Halliburton. All eyes are on that Kings half-court offense to fix their mistakes so far this season and find a way to win that game. But instead of just taking my word for it and my thoughts of what the Kings need to do to beat the Phoenix Suns, I went out and got a message from Brendan Clean. He's the host of the Locked On Suns podcast. Initially, we'd planned to do a bit of a crossover segment here to have me talk to him and get questions from him a little bit on what the Kings need to do to win this game. But unfortunately, we weren't able to work that out. But Brendan was nice enough to send me like a little paragraph of what he thinks the Kings need to do. And I'll read this for you. He says the Kings need to attack in transition, prevent Booker from getting into a rhythm as a scorer, and get a good performance from their bench to beat the Suns. Phoenix has been undisciplined and not on the same page to open the season, and they are vulnerable to a loss if the Kings execute well and get contributions from their reserves. So there's a couple things there to unpack. I want to start with the second thing first. He talks about this team being vulnerable right now. Some look at it, and I understand it, as a negative that the Kings are playing all these good teams to start the season. I look at it potentially as a positive. You've heard me talk about it before. Tristan Thompson said during Kings Media Day that good teams oftentimes take a little bit to get into a rhythm, especially teams that made deep playoff runs like the Phoenix Suns did just a few months ago, losing in the NBA Finals. If they are not at 100% yet, if they haven't worked their way into mid-season form, they are vulnerable for a bad loss or two. That's where the Kings need to take advantage. The Kings should have given that to the Utah Jazz and should have given that to the Golden State Warriors in these last couple of games. Those two teams, although good, and I expect them to be very good, although undefeated, I think Utah's still undefeated. Those two teams were more than beatable at the early part of the season. So are the Phoenix Suns, according to Brendan. So that's one thing. The other thing is he talks about not letting Devin Booker get into a rhythm as a scorer. Yeah, much easier said than done, right? To be fair, Steph Curry had 27 points, never really looked like he got into much of a rhythm. He got something going a little bit in the third quarter and in the second half, but never really took over a game. Devin Booker in the past has taken over games against the Sacramento Kings. He's also hit a couple buzzer beaters to break the hearts of Kings fans to steal wins at the end, both in Sacramento and in Phoenix against the Kings. So Devin Booker has had success and has confidence against the Sacramento Kings. I understand what Brendan is saying. And I'm not saying allow Devin Booker to get his and get 40 points and you hope that you can win that game. But if Devin is going to get his numbers, you can't let others beat you. Easier said than done. That team has a lot of talent on the bench, off the bench. DeAndre Ayton, of course, Chris Paul, McCall Bridges. Like that team is stacked with talent. So you got to be careful. And you don't want to allow everybody to beat you because they're looking for a tune-up game right like that. They're looking for a get-right game to figure some things out. And now that they've dropped a couple of games here to start the season, they're probably bringing an extra intensity into this game that they didn't necessarily have in their first three games or first few games of the season. Brendan also talks about attacking in transition. Of course, that's where the Kings' biggest strength is getting out in transition. That starts on the defensive end, but that is probably going to evaporate in the second half. If the Kings get off to a good start in the first half, forcing turnovers, getting out in transition, that's great. That's wonderful. They need to do one of two things then. They either need to create more separation in the first half playing that way, because in the Utah game, the Kings only got a 9-point lead. In the Golden State Warriors game, the Kings only got an 8-point lead. They never got to a double-digit lead in either of those games. It's more than enough of a gap, it's too small of a gap, and there's more than enough time for teams to close that gap and end up getting a win like, of course, they did. So you need to either, one, if you're having that kind of first half where you're getting out in transition, create more separation for yourselves and give yourself more of a safety net, or two, mentally prepare yourself for the fact that you're not going to get as many transition opportunities in the second half. You're not, unless the Phoenix Suns are playing incredibly sloppy basketball, which they more than likely will not. So prepare yourself that maybe you're getting out in transition and getting those points in the first half, but in the second half, it's going to take some big half-court offensive sets to win this game. And I haven't been in practice, haven't seen shoot around. I expect that half-court, fourth-quarter offense has been a focus point in film rooms and in practice, maybe just as heavily as defense has been over this last couple of weeks. So there's Brendan Clean saying what the Kings have to do to beat the Phoenix Suns. I truly do like the Kings' chances to beat Phoenix. I'm not going to predict it. I'm not going to say the Kings are favorites by any means. Absolutely not. But I like their chances. I think they are more than capable of stealing a game in Phoenix. We saw them do it last season. This season, they're better. I think the Kings can jump on the Phoenix Suns early. I think it's going to end up being a good game. How are you feeling heading into this game? Let me know at Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or let me know on the YouTube chat and comment section down below. Again, thank you to YouTube watchers and listeners for getting Locked On Kings over 1,000 subscribers. You guys are phenomenal. I can't wait for the thousands upon thousands more. I'll continue to turn out the best content that I possibly can. Also want to maybe start doing some exclusive content to YouTube. And then audio listeners, my OGs, the ones who have always been around and continue to support. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. If you could leave a review for this podcast, if you haven't already, best place to do that is Apple Podcasts or iTunes. I really would appreciate that. That helps out the show a lot. And what also helps out is you just continuing to listen and support like you always do. So join me. I will be hosting a post-game podcast after a win or a loss in Phoenix, and then more great content to come throughout the rest of this week and the remainder of this season. So please join me for that. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.